Right, good morning everybody. Thank you for joining us at our webinar in which we'll be looking at issues relating to trading in the future and how businesses can emerge stronger post COVID-19 and Brexit. My name's Tim Stowell and I'll be your chair for today, so I'm taking a break from giving the tax update, so I won't be talking about furloughing or the rather terrifying capital gains tax report that came out yesterday. Instead, we'll be talking about other matters. So as we continue to operate in difficult circumstances, now more than ever, businesses need to explore reinventing themselves to meet the challenges that continue to emerge as a result of the ongoing pandemic and the inevitability of Brexit. How businesses respond in these uncertain times will determine how London and the UK can evolve and remain one of the best places in the world to do business. I'm delighted to be joined today by Damian Nussbaum, Director of Innovation and Growth at the City of London Corporation, who will be sharing his insights on future trade policies to support businesses. I'm also delighted to be joined by my fellow partners, Paul Samrah and Mark Fielden, as well as Geraint Lewis, who leads our VAT team. Paul is our Brexit Impact Specialist. Some of you will know him already, and he'll be drawing on the expertise of Mark, one of my fellow tax partners, and Geraint to guide you through some of the practical scenarios businesses are likely to face and highlight the actions that should be taken. As normal, questions can be posted in the Q&A function, should be at the bottom of your screen. Thanks to those who completed the poll in advance and who submitted questions, which I'll try to weave into the session as we go on. We'll follow up the session with a copy of the slides and the answered questions, together with a link to the recording of the seminar. And we'll also include a feedback poll, and can I, as always, just make the plea to respond to this poll, as it really helps us to shape these sessions for the future and make sure we cover the topics that are really of interest to you. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Damian, who will start the session. Thank you.
Tim, thank you very much, and it's great to join you all, and I'm feeling suitably humbled to be virtually sitting next to some extremely clever people around tax, VAT and other areas, which are truly frightening when you see some of the changes that might be coming down the pipe over the next months and years. My name is Damian Nussbaum. I head the City of London's work on financial and professional services. The City of London Corporation, it runs the square mile, so it has local authority powers, but it's a lot more than that, and we do a lot of work right across the UK in supporting financial and professional services, both in the UK and right around the world. We start from the position that the UK is a world-leading financial centre, but faces probably the strongest challenge in a generation. So we're working with government and firms to ensure that we have a really successful future. And we see that as having 4 key pillars, and that will lead us on in a moment to trade in particular. But it's interesting just to sort of be aware of what those different pillars I think are. Firstly, they're around sustainable innovative ecosystem, a world-class business environment, global recognition of the UK's offer, and market access. So just a word on each of those, and then let's dive into market access. So the innovative ecosystem for new products and services, absolutely key if we're to pay and sell our way in the future. So think fintech, think sustainable finance. You may have seen the Green Horizon Summit that we co-organised, hosted, had the idea to run, where the Chancellor made several far-reaching announcements, not on capital gains, on sustainable finance. And we had the heads of the IMF, the UN, the ECB, as well as the Prince of Wales, setting out how we can pay for the transition to a low-carbon economy. So that's an example of innovative ecosystem. World-class business environment, well, you've got it on your screen here. It's about tax, it's about regulation, it's about skills. Third area is global recognition of the UK's offer. Think marketing, think sales. We have brilliant products and services, but people across the world have got to know what they are. And then market access, they've got to be able to buy them. And that means you've got to be able to have access to those markets to be able to sell them. And that's what I'd like to cover today. So my main focus is on financial and professional services. So I hope that there will be elements that are relevant to everyone, whatever your business focus. So we've heard a lot about an EU trade deal. how far-reaching that could be, and what the implications would be if there's no deal. And obviously Paul and others will be talking a bit more about that. But I'd like to talk a little bit about the financial and professional services element and how that is fitted into the negotiations. But that's only a part of the picture, and the government has been talking a lot about FTAs, free trade agreements, and could they fill the gaps in providing new markets, particularly if there's much less access to the EU? And that's the second part of what I'd like to talk about. So let's start with the EU. There's a real psychological drama around the negotiations that you either find fascinating or absolutely mind-numbing. The European Council on the 15th and 16th of October was supposed to be the deadline, but there is always flexibility, and there are some limitations on the EU side about the timing of what they can do when. The European Parliament was telling us they needed to see any deal by their plenary on the 11th of November. Clearly that's come and gone. And their next plenary is 14th, 17th of December. So that probably is going to be one of the key dates. But ultimately with these kind of things, one senses that usually there's a way to get a deal through if there's a will, and that is going to be one of the key elements to this. And one wonders, I have no particular insight, but some of the shenanigans going on at number 10 at the moment, whether part of that is whether they're really going to go all out for a deal or not. But what would be in a deal for financial and professional services? So on financial services, I suppose our sense is that there's been a series of downward steps in terms of ambition over the last months and years. We hope to see, for instance, a strong agreement on regulatory cooperation, but any agreement on that fell by the wayside in the summer, where the government decided that wasn't something they were going to push for. So it's clear that there's going to be no coverage of financial services or services more generally in any FTA agreed at least this time round. So the main market access mechanism will be equivalence provisions in EU financial services regulations. So that is a regulatory route rather than the trade measure, but frankly, it's the end that counts, not the means. The limitations of equivalence are well known. They're sort of limited in their coverage, they can be withdrawn and so on, but they're a lot better than nothing. And there was an agreement with the EU that would, all things being equal, the assessments would be made and they would be put in place. But of course, it's always political. And so although it should be being looked at on a technical basis, that's not, at least on the EU side, the way that it's been working. So far, the only equivalence decision that has been taken by the EU is in recognising UK CCPs, the clearinghouses, to allow EU firms to continue using UK clearinghouses to meet their clearing obligations. That is for financial stability reasons and because the EU side can see that it's absolutely necessary that they do that. But it's temporary. It's been granted for 18 months from 1st of January, and the Commission stated their intention that firms use this time to migrate their clearing onshore to the EU. We understand why they're doing that. We're a bit surprised in the sense the Americans don't see the same need. There's lots of dollar clearing. This is clearly part of a sort of industrial strategy, but it's part of the wider game. So that will leave approvals to do business state by state, and that is going to be a lot more time consuming and complicated unless the EU moves forwards on some of the other areas of equivalence. Much more positively on the UK side, we were very pleased that earlier this week the Chancellor of the Exchequer announced that the UK would be granting equivalence in key areas. We think this is a really vital part of the way that the UK positions itself as a place to do business, that we are open, that we are welcoming, and that we're not looking at everything as a zero-sum reciprocal game. And traditionally, it's been that open trading centre that has made the UK and London such an attractive place to do business. Second part around mutual recognition of professional qualifications, MRPQs, lawyers and accountants. Again, there was a plan from the UK to have some kind of mutual recognition written into a trade agreement. The EU has made it very clear that it's only on for a sort of Canada style recognition that this would be a good thing to happen, but it would need to be done by specific area and not through a trade agreement. So again, not really much on offer. If you're feeling a bit depressed after all of that, yes, from a financial and professional services or even a services point of view, a deal doesn't look as though it's immediately got a lot on offer, but it is clearly critical for the rest of the economy that the flow of goods continues as smoothly as possible. So I would say, that we and others working in services are really keen that there is a deal. And it's also key because, for a couple of other reasons, we think it will help on side agreements. One of the key ones is going to be around data adequacy. The free flow of data in both directions underpins every other area of business, absolutely key. The EU has been questioning whether we apply the rules in the way that they think that they should be applied. Any of you who've had the great pleasure of having to apply GDPR might question whether actually we've probably done it rather more systematically than some member states, but politics is politics, and this is part of the political game. There are other ways, obviously, of covering some of those data approaches, but it's more costly and more complicated. And so we would very much welcome if data adequacy can come, as it were, on the coattails of an agreement, and maybe we would get some more equivalence through alongside that as well. But I think particularly the political positivity of having a deal, in not having a really rancorous fallout that could set the tone for years, could make a real difference in the way that firms are regulated in both directions. And the key point's very clear since the election of Biden. It opens the route to a potential deal with the US. So let's turn now from the EU-UK story to what the UK has been doing globally. What's the approach to getting access, and what's the progress so far? Because of course, this was a lot of the logic of you're looking to have a free trade policy is that you can then make more exciting trade agreements. So where are we at? I should say a word first, and this is probably particularly in the context of services, and particularly financial and professional services. It's not all about FTAs. There is a sense that governments like FTAs because they're a big announcement, but actually, and they can be incredibly powerful, but they are a very time-consuming and complicated way to get access, particularly for services. And there are other routes for doing it, particularly regulatory agreements or other kinds of agreement. And so that's why when, for instance, we go to the US very regularly, we're in Washington, and we will talk to USTR, to the trade negotiator who's leading. We'll go to Congress, we'll talk to the people on the Hill who would have to agree any deal. But we spend just as much time talking to the regulatory agencies, especially to the Fed, the CFTC and the SEC, because so much can be done through those routes, and the Treasury as the US Treasury as well. But let's come back to FTAs and the UK FTA agenda. Two parts to that, or at least two parts: new markets for full new FTAs and rollover of the existing agreements between the EU and states where the UK currently benefits from them, but unless there's some kind of rollover, won't after the 1st of January. So in terms of new FTAs, there have been 3 or 4 key focuses. US has been obviously the most high profile, but actually the scope probably to move ahead more quickly with Australia, with New Zealand, may be larger. And the so-called CPTPP, which trips off the tongue and stands for the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, I think I've got that right, but CPTPP, which is 11 countries, and is slightly sort of longer term, but would be very powerful because it covers Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, and Vietnam. So it's very broad. That's about 13% of world GDP, and with the UK it would be 16%. So it's a great way of getting volume in one jump. New Zealand, for instance, would be a fantastic FTA to do because they're so like-minded, but it's not really going to change the price of fish by very much. Actually, probably best to leave fish out of this discussion for the moment. CTPP, just to stay with the moment, it's viewed as one of the most forward-looking FTAs with a strong combination of enforcement mechanisms and with some novel provisions around data, environment, and so on. And one of the, I think, very exciting things that the government is looking to do is see how can you do new and different, how can you work in new and different ways. I sit on one of their trade advisory groups. I can't talk about that obviously because it's a non-disclosure agreement, but it's been really impressive to see how they're looking to be very innovative in what they're doing, and actually to be doing that when they're pretty stretched is, you know, you have to chalk it up to them. Rollover FTAs are incredibly important because, of course, you know, people are already benefiting from some of those, and if I think it's 15 that have not been rolled over, and if your company is using any of the advantages of those, you know, it is worth being aware that there will be a rollback to normal world trade rules, and that might be quite a big rollback. The biggest of those at the moment is Canada. Justin Trudeau was saying just recently that, you know, the rollover is there to be done, but he thinks that the DIT are a bit thinly stretched, which clearly thoroughly riled DIT, and they said that we're not too stretched, we're just waiting for Canada to come back on some of our offers. My bet is that that will be rolled over, but there are some others, I think Mexico, Egypt, Singapore, that still need that rollover. The big news on rollover was Japan, because it wasn't just a rollover. We had all wondered whether the Japanese would use this opportunity for it to be effectively a rollback. In other words, to say, look, you're a much smaller market than, you know, was being offered under EU, so we would like to have some more concessions, please. What we're seeing, and the negotiations concluded on the 23rd of October, they'd only started in June. It was a really impressive feat because they've not only rolled over, but they've taken things further in some areas. There is a stronger financial services chapter. There's a lot more around data. It's really interesting what they're doing on data. And as ever on FTAs, they start from where best practice is and they build on it, and they have taken things forward. So, you know, exciting news on Japan. It should be coming into force on the 1st of January if both parliaments in the UK and in Japan can see it through. What about some of the others? Well, US, we've had 5 rounds of negotiations. There is actually lots of progress. There was, with FTAs, it's the technical and it's the political. So the technical has been doing reasonably well, I think, in a lot of areas, but, you know, it's no secret that the politics, in the sense that there are going to be some key areas, and the key area is no surprise to anyone. I remember being on the Hill and talking to the senator for Alabama, and we said, you know, what do you feel about this this trade deal? He said, I won't even try the accent, I'm 100% behind it. I am so keen to see it happen, provided it provides very significant advantages for Alabama farmers. Provided it does that, we're absolutely up for it. And you've got another however many, you know, senators who will be exactly the same place. So it will mean agriculture incredibly difficult. And some of the, you know, the red lines that we know around animal welfare, because chlorinated chicken is really about an animal welfare issue, and, you know, hormones in beef and so on. That is going to be, I think, a genuine difficulty. Second difficulty, of course, is I think Trump really wanted the deal, whereas Biden is got much more mixed feelings. A lot will depend on what happens on the EU side, but he's got a problem, and the problem is in trade promotion authority. That is a way of simplifying and fast tracking any deal. And in simple terms, that runs out in next July. Congress have to have any deal 90 days, 3 months before that. So they've got to have something before the beginning of April. No meaningful discussions are going to go on between now and a new administration coming in. Why not? Because if any concessions are given by the UK to a Trump administration, guess what? A Biden administration say, we'll pocket that and we'd like some more now. So nothing will move substantively. So you've basically got February and March to move things forward. So if you were holding your breath for a US deal, you're going to have to hold it for a little while longer. Some of the others, Australia and New Zealand, I mean, my sense is they will they will be the quiet stars of this, and they will move forward quickly. Let's see how quickly, and let's see how innovative they can be, but it could be really quite exciting. So what's the strategy on all this? I mean, I think all of that illustrates that the focus is really on traditional trading partners, US, all of the rollovers, but US, where actually the partnership that we've got with the US is pretty strong already. We don't particularly see that there's going to be huge advantages from having an FTA on financial services, for instance, but it'll sort of secure the playing field we've got already, and it might future-proof a little bit. We could think a little bit about some of the future areas, particularly around data. So it could be helpful, but modestly helpful, at least in our area. Lots of other areas would be very very good. So traditional trading partners, historical connections like Australia and New Zealand, groundbreaking, forward-looking FTAs like CP, TPP, but one does need to sort of remember that actually the huge trading volumes are around places like EU, or places that are associated with the EU, like Turkey, which is, the UK trades more with Turkey than Australia, but because the customs union that Turkey has with the EU, obviously that's not something that we can so easily engage with them on. I touched already on the value of FTAs. It's at a macro level, it's notoriously difficult to measure. How much is this worth to the British economy? Maybe we'll come back to that in questions. It's very difficult to actually gauge it, because a lot of this is putting in place new frameworks and then guessing what the behaviour of people will be once those new frameworks apply and once the new access rights are in place. But there is absolutely no doubt that FTAs can impact specific businesses and economic sectors. We really saw that actually with South Korea, where in certain sectors there was huge change in trade flows. And so it's really worth, I think, as a business, looking at what the specifics of these trade agreements are and what that might open up, what new opportunities there might be. FTAs are also very useful because they can provide more certainty. It's much more difficult to withdraw a privilege that's given by an FTA than by another route. That's the slight disadvantage of the regulatory route. It's much easier just to sort of withdraw an advantage, although that has also its political implications. So just by way of conclusion, I'd say probably there's 5 key quick points. EU trade is critically important, and clearly for goods, it's going to be at the heart of a lot of your and our concerns. But even for services, really important to have a deal. It'll provide the platform for data transfers and for future progress on financial and professional services, as well as on unlocking progress towards a US deal. Secondly, FTAs help, but they're alongside regulatory and other kinds of agreements. Thirdly, I'd say it's great to see government ambition around particularly data, digital services, and being very forward-looking, and actually around sustainability as well. Fourthly, implications of these deals do look at what the opportunities that they may open up, and we're already seeing Japan on the table. New Zealand and Australia, I suspect, will be very positive, and CTPTT could be really interesting because of its size. And of course, finally, the US will be the big one, but don't plan on opening any champagne to celebrate that one anytime soon. Tim, back to you.
Thanks, Damian. Sorry, busily scribbling notes as you're talking. Thank you very much for that. Look, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. One, to look into your crystal ball. So, although you very clearly made the point that FTAs are not, free trade agreements are not everything, not the be all and end all. But what would you, if you had to walk down to Ladbrokes now and put a bet on for the next 3 to be implemented, where would your money be?
Wow. So the next 3. So if we leave aside the rollovers, so first I'd say I think we'll have Canada by the new year. I'm not sure we'll have Singapore and one or two others. So that's my first prediction. My second would be, if these were sort of, horses in a race, and there are four, as it were, that are in play at the moment, with sort of US, Australia, New Zealand, and CTPTT. I would say that I would probably put them in this order: New Zealand. And this is without having this is not sort of inside knowledge or anything like that, because there's loads to do on all of them. But I would say, just because of the sort of the politics in many cases, I would see New Zealand followed by Australia, and then it will be a toss-up, because both of the other two are big, ugly beasts that are going to be really tough. And I would see probably it'll take 2 years on both. And the one that will come through first is that Trans-Pacific Partnership before the US.
Okay, that's really so. Those are the three horses, but they don't sound like very quick horses to us. So, and then just on your summing up there, you mentioned that the businesses should look for opportunities that arise when these FTAs come in place. Where should they go to look? Are there any good resources out there, or should they go to local trade bodies? Of course, we can help. What can the City of London do? What resources are out there?
So it's a great question. I think if they're interested in very specific elements, or even shaping things, they're saying, God, if we could just open up X or Y in one of those markets, I would advise them to actually contact directly DIT. There's the possibility of contact directly. I have been genuinely impressed with the appetite that they have to learn from industry. There are then also sort of industry groups, so whatever industry group you are part of, they will be doing things. So Chambers of Commerce, CBI or FSB, or whatever, they are all involved in one way or another. So they are fantastic resources. And I suspect, I mean, this is more impressionistic, but I've got the sense that it's the Chambers of Commerce that are perhaps most on the ground, able to offer very specific advice on what is and isn't possible as a result of the changes that are being made.
Okay, that's helpful. We've found the DIT being very helpful when we've been doing things with India and the US. And one final question before I hand over to Paul, that's come in on the Q&A. And again, we're back down to Ladbrokes again. Where's your money on the EU deal? I mean, I scribbled down the dates, 14th to 17th of December for the plenary session. And saw where that was in the calendar, and whether it's going to interfere with people's Christmases too much or not when the holidays fall. Do you think anything will happen in that meeting, or are we going down the regulatory route until sometime into New Year?
So it depends a little bit, Tim, on the morning. I remember talking to a quite senior EU minister who said, my betting is that there's going to be a no deal, it'll crash out, but we'll have a deal within 6 months, because everyone will see how difficult it is. But my just slight feeling is that we'll probably have something, but it'll be very thin. Maybe it's going to be even thinner than what we're hearing about at the moment. And at the end of the day, it's all going to come down to fish, really. I mean, it's interesting that we're sort of fighting as a country, fighting for the right to stuff more money into industries that are having problems. That's essentially state aids. On state aids in the past, the UK was always the one that wanted to have the tightest possible state aids rules, so that we weren't putting money into industries and no one else could either. It's quite an interesting sort of change around. So that may be the one that the government really pushes on, but I suspect it's going to come down to fish.
Okay, well, on that note, fishy, cautious optimism, perhaps, I'm going to hand over to Paul. Thank you, Damian. Oh, do please keep sending the Q&A, and there's one stored up, so we're going to return to the Q&A after Paul and others' session, and we'll hopefully wrap up all the questions towards the end. So over to you, Paul. Thank you, Damian.
Thanks, Tim, and thank you, Damian. Very insightful and very useful indeed. Obviously, with the US election now almost fully behind us, with Joe Biden taking office on the 20th of January, and his view of the internal market bill and the implications for Northern Ireland, perhaps the Joe Biden win has possibly tilted towards a deal but obviously we'll have to see, because obviously the House of Lords threw it out earlier in the week, so we'll see. I thought we'd just take the opportunity to just pick up on a couple of hidden gems that have surfaced over the last 10 days or so, and then we'd go into 3 practical case studies, and we'll be joined by Mark and Geraint to look at corporate taxation aspects, and including, of course, VAT in these scenarios. So I just thought I'd touch on ECMT, International Road Haulage Permits. It's got even more bizarre in this Brexit world that we're in. The HMRC have announced that permits will be required for lorries travelling through the ECMT member countries. And ECMT stands for European Conference of Ministers of Transport. Even more complex. So you might need permits for journeys to or through the EU 27 from 1st of January. And wait for it, the deadline to apply for permits for next year, the deadline is 11:59 p.m. on Friday, the 20th of November. You couldn't make it up, really. So you will need an ECMT permit to transport most types of goods, or even drive an empty vehicle through the EU and onto some 13 countries. So it's using the EU as your transport route through to some 13 countries. I won't name them all, but a few of them are Bosnia and Herzegovina, Georgia, Russia, Serbia, and interestingly, Turkey. And picking up on Damian's comment about Turkey and the trade with Turkey, that could be quite significant. So log on to HMRC's website for more details. ECMT member countries transport permits required. But as I say, the deadline is 11:59 p.m. on Friday, the 20th of November. And this has only just come out. So exporting goods to the EU 27. Now, you have your UK EORI number, but do you need an EU EORI number? Well, certainly if your business is responsible for completing both the export declaration as goods leave the UK, as well as the import declaration when the goods are imported into the EU 27, then you will definitely need both the UK EORI number and an EU number. So this will include situations where you are the importer of record in the EU 27, as well as being the exporter from the UK. So you need to apply to the relevant EU customs authority. I had heard that Germany were delaying issuing EU their own EORI number until 1st of January. We'll have to see whether that stays in place. But certainly, if you are the importer of record, then you will need to obtain the particular country's EORI number. And then I just the publication of the Border with the European Union document, which is the border operating model that HMRC have published. It runs to 270 pages, but does cover all the detail as to how customs declarations, certificates of origin, etc., will be operating. And of course, if you haven't been on the Brexit webinars that we've run before and aren't aware, whether there's a deal or no deal is totally irrelevant for the volume of customs declarations that are going to be needed as we emerge from the EU. So customs declarations for goods, absolutely bang on the table, and there's a lot of detail on our Brexit hub, so do pick up on that. Right, now if we move on to a case study, and as I say, I'm delighted to be joined by Geraint, who is our Director of VAT, and Mark Fielden, who's one of my partners dealing with tax. So this scenario, we have an ad agency, Advertising Partners LLP, and they're based in the UK. They're based in London, and their client base includes large multinational EU27 headquartered companies, dare we say, car manufacturers over in the EU. But their client base are saying, we want to contract with an EU27 entity. We don't want to contract with Advertising Partners LLP. So if I open it up to Geraint and Mark to take that forward, and what is the solution?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Just harking back to what Damian said, this again looks at the point that, you know, historically, although they were called free trade agreements, they have not generally concentrated on supplies of services. And as Damian said, those are often dealt with outside of free trade agreements. And indeed, for those of you with long memories, the UK back in the days of Mrs. Thatcher was very vocal in saying that the EU had not created a single market for services, and arguably, in some respects at least, they never did, at least not to the extent that they did for goods. Now, this is a pretty common problem that we're coming across. This is not driven by the fact that the supplier, in this case, particularly wants to change anything. It is the customers who, for potentially regulatory, but probably more for internal purchasing rules and the like, want to contract with an EU27 entity. So typically here you're looking at Advertising Partners LLP having to set up a new entity in an EU country of their choice. I think at the moment the most popular choices we're seeing is Holland and the Republic of Ireland for some practical reasons and some tax reasons, and using that as a vehicle to service these particular clients who are insisting that they're contracting with an EU27 entity. And the questions really for the UK supplier here is, how much substance do those entities need? It will need to be VAT registered in whichever country it sets itself up in. How do you deal with the relationship between the UK head office and the subsidiary in, let's say, the Netherlands? And indeed, what does it need to do, if anything, for local regulatory, employment, etc. purposes? So the solution in this case is frankly relatively straightforward. It's driven by the customers. They have to set up an entity in the 27. The devil, as with a lot of this stuff, is in the detail, and how you actually go about doing that in a way that is both commercially efficient and minimises your tax. And certainly in this case, one of the things that you have to consider is the effect of direct tax on both the country you set up in and in the UK, in the relationship between the two entities, for which I think I pass the ball over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Geraint. Yeah, I mean, before talking about tax, it's probably worth just thinking about it commercially. I mean, we're told it's an advertising business. Where does an advertising business need to be, even if it's just a brass plaque on a wall? It's potentially not some industrial estate in Holland. It's currently in London, you know, very, very upbeat, very high tech, very trendy city. Does the clients want to contract with someone in somewhere that isn't a notable jurisdiction? I don't know, maybe they want to go to Milan or Paris or somewhere like that. But obviously that's completely nothing to do with what we would advise on. In terms of the tax position on something like this, Geraint is correct. Probably some sort of entity in one of the EU states is the way to go. It could be a branch, but I suspect an entity is probably easier. The sorts of things that one would have to think about are how will that entity be financed? What will it actually do? Will it simply be a pass-through vehicle for the supplies that are being made by the London LLP, or will it have its own people? Now, probably that the LLP is thinking, well, we want to do the least amount possible here, so everything will probably still continue to be done through London, and then perhaps on charge to the new subsidiary, and then build to a client. From a tax perspective, many jurisdictions in the EU will operate transfer pricing rules and require that some of the profit um, associated with the work that's being done is attributed to the local entity. That will mean a tax charge in whatever local jurisdiction we select. It's worth noting that the UK currently has one of the lowest rates of corporation tax. So moving profits out of our country and into the EU, unless you pick a very specific place, Republic of Ireland perhaps as a quite a beneficial corporation tax rate, it's possible you're going to be paying more corporation tax on your profit. There are various reliefs, but that's the thing to take away. There are generally higher corporation tax rates in Europe. You might also need to think about how you repatriate any profits that are made. If we're just talking essentially a pass-through vehicle, then the profits might not be very much, and it might not be much of an issue. We might not need much funding locally. But if there are significant profits anticipated being made in the EU, what does that mean? How do we get that back? You know, we might just pay a dividend up, which might be fine, but it might not be post 31st of December in the context of withholding taxes. It's a slightly different analysis with an LLP in the UK rather than the company, but post the end of this year, as I've said on previous updates, a number of the European directives which apply to minimise and eliminate cross-border taxation within the EU will cease to apply to the UK. So don't pick a jurisdiction that's going to slap a massive withholding tax on your dividend or return of interest or whatever, which you then can't recover against your UK tax bill. So there are definitely things to think about from a direct tax perspective. But that's probably it for this one.
Thank you, Mark. On to case study 2. We'll speed things up now. So this is now into goods, and case study 3, the final one, is also about goods. So what we have here is Widget Limited, who are based in Barnard Castle. I wonder why. And they export to EU27 and the rest of the world. Small and medium-sized enterprises are their customer base in the EU, but are customers happy to deal with a UK company? Let's go to Geraint for that first.
Yeah, again, this is something we're seeing with a number of people we're talking to, where their concern is that they are customers who are not currently importers, who are not dealing with customs formalities, will simply be reluctant to take on that extra administrative burden, and that may be enough in a competitive world to look to them to source their product from suppliers within the 27. So again, you're probably looking at a structure here which involves an entity being set up in the 27 somewhere, and with Widget Co selling their products effectively to themselves. That could be a branch, that could be a subsidiary. And then that subsidiary within the 27 selling the products to the customers in order to avoid them having to deal with that extra administrative burden. Now that comes with a number of considerations. I mean, one is obviously that means that Widget Co is now taking on that administrative burden. Widget Co is having to deal with making a significant number not only of exports from the UK, but imports into the EU. So there's going to be additional costs for them. That's going to impact on their profitability. There's going to be questions, again, like we touched on in number 1, about how much substance does the subsidiary need? What sort of profit does it need? How does this impact on the chain of supply? If at the moment Widget Co is using somebody like DHL to deliver directly to its customers in the 27, do you now need to look at how that is done? Do you now need them to come into a single point in the EU and then explode them out from there? There's all sorts of practical issues here, as well as the technical tax issues. Again, there's VAT registrations looking at, there's customs duty questions, particularly in the case of a no deal. If this is items coming in, will there be EU duty to pay? Even if there is a deal, if these are not items that are of UK origin, so if Widget Co doesn't actually necessarily manufacture everything, but brings some of the stuff in from the Far East, it still may be subject to EU duty. So there's a whole raft of practical things to consider with these sorts of scenarios, which, as I said, are some we're seeing quite regularly. And again, I'll pass over to Mark.
Just one point, Geraint. I suppose it emphasises the point that as the supplier, you must be in conversation with your customers to clarify exactly what their expectations are.
Yes.
Before you proceed to do anything, but it's clearly important.
I mean, I think that's a difficult one. I think, particularly for these types of businesses who perhaps got a large and diverse client base, quite a few of them have said to me, well, we're a bit reluctant to start too many hairs running with our customers, because what we think our customers want is as little disruption, change as possible. And particularly if you're looking at a business where speed to market is key, where getting stuff to the final point of delivery within, let's say, 24 or 48 hours is key. Anything that changes the logistical flow of the goods is a big potential disruption to the business and needs to be thought about very carefully.
Okay, thanks for that. Mark, just picking up on the tax aspects before we quickly run through case study 3.
Yeah, I think very similar, frankly, Paul, to the previous one. If we're having a subsidiary to facilitate delivery to EU customers, such that they don't notice that any difference in their supply chain or admin burden, then the issues, as previously discussed, are the same. There is potentially a taxable presence somewhere in the EU. I don't know if the fact that we would potentially be moving goods here might mean we actually need bodies on site, our own employees. If we do, then quite clearly then there are payroll and withholding taxes to consider locally. And taking on employees, to give an example, in France, for example, is not a cheap business. The social security contributions and employment levies in that jurisdiction are significantly higher than they are in the UK, and it is there is then a question of employment law locally as well. I mean, it's much more difficult to hire and fire people in certain more socialist jurisdictions in the EU, which is said flippantly, but is a business decision which clients need to think about.
Great, thanks, Mark. Just in the final couple of minutes, we'll just go on to case study 3, which is the reverse. Effectively, we have an importer. Company in the EU is exporting clothing from Germany. They're based in Germany and they're exporting to the UK. This is Gonfra Burton Limited, has a presence in Ireland as well, and they're the recipient of the goods from Germany, but they're refusing to be the importer of record. Geraint, what is the solution here?
Yeah, again, we're looking at a solution here which involves the supplier in this case, so the German customer, having to be the importer of record in the UK because their customer, for commercial reasons, simply refuses to fulfill that role. That probably, in most cases, will require the establishment of a branch or a subsidiary or something in the UK in order to take that process forward, and more importantly, in order to be able to recover the import VAT that will be charged when the goods, or will need to be accounted for when the goods arrive in the UK. There are a couple of very particular or other issues to think about. One is the origin issue. If these are shirts or items of clothing or whatever it is that are not manufactured in Germany, so if the German company is simply a distributor for clothing manufactured outside the EU, Far East, whatever, then the rate of duty applicable when these goods arrive in the UK will be charged by reference to the rate of duty for imports from the Far East, not the rate of duty for imports from Germany. So with something like clothing, which has got a relatively high rate of duty, you may well be paying 10, 12, even 20% duty when the goods arrive in Germany, and a similar rate of duty when the goods arrive in the UK. So without further planning in terms of potentially use of a bonded warehouse or various other types of duty relief, you are looking at perhaps a marginal rate of duty of close to 40%, which is clearly going to impact on profit margins. The other issue that Gone for Burton has is in terms of supplies to its customers in it, or that the German have, as rather, it supplies to the Republic of Ireland. I think it's sufficient to say for this point that a shipment that goes Germany, UK ROI is now going to become significantly more complicated and potentially significantly a lot more expensive, because you now have effectively 2 exports and 2 imports, one into the UK from Germany and one into Ireland from the UK. So again, people are looking at either perhaps routing product directly from Germany to the Republic of Ireland, or importing them into the UK and using various reliefs for temporary importations and goods in transportation, etc., in order to avoid what could be a very significant duty charge and lots of admin. So yeah, this is a common one. We're seeing, just anecdotally, there are a lot of large companies in the UK out there, and indeed in Europe, particularly in the sort of retail sector, who are just saying to their suppliers, we will not act as the importer of record. They could, they are just refusing to do so. So Mark, I don't know if you want to add anything on the direct tax side?
I think a lot of this, as you and I have said, Geraint, on a lot of the projects we've worked on together, a lot of the issues that come from Brexit are indirect taxes, so VAT and duties. I mean, in the context of this particular example, we don't have the detail, obviously, to know precisely where the UK company sells most of its product. Taking Geraint's point, if a lot of the customers, the end customers for the UK company are outside of the UK, perhaps, then maybe we look at a wholesale supply chain rejigging such that we don't have those double duty hits. Maybe everything goes straight from Germany to Ireland and never touches the UK if the end customer is not in the United Kingdom. And when you start doing things like that, you have tax issues. You have more functions in other jurisdictions. You have more people in other jurisdictions. All of those things come with things to think about from a tax perspective. And then again, you have to think about how you get the money, the profits, the return on what you're doing back to the United Kingdom. You then have to look at tax treaties between countries, which we've not had to look at for many years, and so forth. I mean, there isn't, and probably just to wrap up, there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution to any of this, because every business is different, contracting with different markets through different jurisdictions with different products, different service lines. It really does need, where you have transactions between the UK and the EU 27, specific consideration and advice is the only way to go to get it right.
Right. Thank you, Mark. No, absolutely excellent. I mean, important point here that every situation is different and there'll be different nuances. So I'm going to hand back to Tim. Thank you, Geraint, and thank you.
Just we've got a few minutes in the run up to our build hour, so I'm going to do some rapid fire questions, if I may. First one to Damian. So Damian, you're just on mute if you want to prepare for that. Have you got a view on the new Office for Investment and how likely it is to sway or influence the DIT? You can plead the fifth if you want, if commenting on the Office for Investment is not what you want to do, but any view?
No, delighted to. No, and it's something. So it's the brainchild of the Minister of Investment, Jerry Grimstone, who we know very well, and we were talking to him as he was sort of developing the ideas. We're really pleased that it's happening. The idea is, think Singapore, think Ireland. If they see the potential for big, for major investment, for something really strategic to come in, for an investor who would like to invest but isn't quite sure, they are able to align lots of different parts of government and unblock, and that's what this will do. And I think it's actually a very clever move, because it could have been put in DIT, it's been put in number 10. but it'll be working very closely with Jerry. So then you get the best of both worlds, because you've got someone who's a very canny operator in Joe Grimstone. You've got one of the number 10 special advisors, as it were, who hasn't been involved in all the shenanigans, Lord Lister, who's extremely focused on this. I think it's, the potential is there for something really special to happen. But let's see, and let's see if we can, see some really major investments as a result.
Good. Well, thank you for that, Damian. A question that came in advance, so I'll just read this one out. This is probably for Geraint. We're a manufacturing company currently exporting to all the European countries and the rest of the world. Will our customers in Europe require an EORI number, an EORI number, to import from the UK?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So the question goes on, we're seeing an awful lot of information on this, but we do not want to alarm our customers. I suppose not alarming them is probably telling them about it now rather than on the 1st of January.
I think so. I mean, just to give a bit of background, an EORI number is in effect, a reference number used at importation. So in most EU member states, it is the importer's VAT number with a couple of extra digits or a couple of extra letters, or in some cases digits and letters added, and they're usually all issued pretty much automatically. So there's no extra forms to fill in terms of returns or anything. It's simply when the goods are imported into, let's say, France, the customer has to report his EORI number as one of the factual bits of data that goes on the import declaration.
Okay, thank you, Geraint. There's a question which you've probably already answered, because it's of a subject matter close to my heart. I'm going to ask anyway. So we export cheese, caught my eye. We export cheese to the EU, and we've set up an EU subsidiary to sell to EU customers. Some of the cheese we export is currently imported from the Republic of Ireland. Yep. In the event of no deal, could we be in a situation where we have to pay duty on the import, Republic of Ireland to the UK, and duty on the export, UK to mainland Europe? I suspect the answer is yes.
I think it's relatively unlikely, because presumably the cheese manufactured in the Republic of Ireland would, for customs duty purposes, be seen as originating in the EU. Okay. But that would depend on the fine print of any relationship between the UK and the EU. But if you apply general customs principles, then no.
Okay, well, I think that's helpful. It was like a cheese-based question. And then the final question, which might be more of an observation than a question, all things considered, especially some of the deadlines that are always in place, as mentioned, would it be wise for UK-based businesses to act before 31st December with regard to withholding taxes? I think that's one for you, Mark, really, rather than worry about the withholding tax when the dividend's paid next year. Get everything in place now that you can. Any view on that?
Yeah, I mean, yes. If there is definitely a problem, then, and you have reserves sitting in a bank in an EU jurisdiction that you could pay up now, then yes, absolutely, it's a no-brainer to pay it up. What I would say is that there is a lot of I don't know, scaremongering around withholding tax rates. It's not as bad as perhaps some advisors lead us to believe. There are a lot of domestic exemptions in the EU that don't rely on tax treaties or European directives to exempt dividends from withholding tax to the UK. That said, there are some that are not so benign. So find out where you've got find out where you want to pay the dividend from. Look at the local law, look at the treaty, look at the directive, and then act accordingly. And you've got about 6 weeks.
Yeah, and that can all be done now. And then the final question, and then we'll be wrapping up more or less on the button. Probably one for you, Geraint. Can you have an associated EU entity, so I guess a subsidiary of the trading company in the UK? Could you have an associated EU entity on the shipping docks? So have an EORI number for exports, but a different entity on the sales invoice?
A different entity, or well, you can have an issue where the importer is not the customer. So in order to be the importer for customs purposes, you don't actually have to own the goods. So you could have the subsidiary as the importer for customs duty purposes, and the consignee, i.e. the person to whom the goods are being delivered, being the ultimate customer. I mean, there are several wrinkles and complications around how you would work that. And there are then questions, the real challenge with that is, what happens to the import VAT?
Okay, probably in the last 1 second we won't address that question. So,
No.
Right, thank you for bearing with us, those who stayed through it, and thank you very much to Damian, Paul, Mark, and Geraint for their contributions. As I said before, we'll be circulating the recording of this, any slides, and the Q&A as well. You'll also get the feedback poll. So, as I said, we'll be ever so grateful if you could feedback with that. On What We Send Around later, you'll get the contact details of the more Kingston Smith people and presumably Damian's as well, although we'll check with you, Damian, whether you're happy for that. And you can send through any other queries you've got offline later if there's any other burning questions. So it remains for me to say thank you for you all attending. Thank you for the panelists, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Bye.